Look in the mirror for 3 seconds. You see a single, smooth surface. One person. One body. But that single surface is an illusion your brain is built to maintain. Because under certain biological conditions, when two groups of your skin cells don't match perfectly, your body can reveal something most people never notice. A hidden pattern that runs across the human form in sweeping curves, V-shapes, and whorls, as if someone drew a map on you before you were born. Dermatologists call them Blaschko's lines. They are not blood vessels, they are not nerves, they are not muscles, and they are not energy meridians. They're something more grounded, and honestly, more unsettling. A record of how skin cells spread and multiplied as you formed in the womb. Today we're going to talk about what Blaschko's lines really are, why they usually stay invisible, and what it means when they appear. Because when they do, they're not just a skin curiosity. They're evidence that the body you think of as one can, in very literal genetic terms, be a patchwork. And that leads to a hard, fascinating question. If your skin can be a mosaic of different cellular lineages, what does you actually mean? First, the basic fact. If you could peel the skin off a human body like a suit, which you should not do, obviously, and lay it flat, you would not see a random sheet. Dermatologists discovered that many skin conditions don't show up randomly. They show up along consistent pathways: V-shaped patterns over the upper spine, S-shaped curves over the chest and sides, and swirling arcs on the scalp. Those pathways are Blaschko's lines. They were described in the early 1900s by a German dermatologist, Alfred Blaschko, after he noticed that certain rashes and lesions repeatedly appeared in similar patterns across different patients. Here's the key point. Blaschko's lines are not a structure you can dissect like an organ. They're a pattern, like the grain in wood. The grain isn't a separate object. It's what you see when the material was formed in a particular way. So what formed this grain in skin? Development. Early in embryonic development, your skin is built from cells that multiply, move, and spread to cover the body as it grows. Those cells don't expand like a balloon inflating evenly. They expand in streams and territories. Think of it like laying down turf on a growing landscape. As the surface expands, the patches meet, overlap, and form boundaries. Now, in most people, those territories look the same, because the cells are genetically the same in any meaningful way, so the pattern stays invisible. But if one territory of skin cells is genetically or functionally different from the neighboring territory, different pigment potential, different susceptibility to inflammation, different expression of an X-linked gene, then the pattern becomes visible, because the difference follows the developmental map. That's why Blaschko's lines matter. They're not mystical stripes. They're a developmental blueprint that becomes visible when biology creates contrast between cell populations. And biology creates contrast more often than most people realize, because your body is not a single uniform population of cells in the way your intuition imagines. Let's talk about that intuition for a second. Most of us think of DNA like a barcode. You have one code, every cell has it, end of story. But the body is messier than that. There are at least 3 ways you can end up with different genetic zones inside one person. The first is mosaicism. Mosaicism means that after the first fertilized cell begins dividing, a genetic change happens in one cell line, maybe a mutation, maybe a chromosomal change. Every cell descending from that altered cell carries that difference, while other cell lines do not. That can create patches of tissue with different genetic instructions. If the difference affects skin pigment or immune response or structural proteins, it can appear on the skin in a pattern, often along Blaschko's lines. This is why certain genetic skin conditions show up as streaks or whorls. The pattern isn't random. It's tracing the history of cell expansion. The second is X inactivation. sometimes called lionization. If you're female, you have two X chromosomes. Early in development, each cell randomly silences one X chromosome. That's normal. It's how the body balances gene dosage. But random across millions of cells can still produce territories where one X is active more often than the other, especially when a gene on one X leads to a visible trait in skin, like pigment differences or certain X-linked disorders. So again, you can see a pattern, because the body is literally a patchwork of cells expressing one version of the X chromosome or the other. And then there's the third, rarer category, chimerism. Chimerism means one individual contains cells from two different fertilized eggs. That can happen in a few ways. One is the fusion of two early embryos into one. Another is the exchange of cells between twins in the womb. Another is microchimerism, small numbers of cells passing between mother and fetus during pregnancy, which is real and surprisingly common, though it usually involves tiny amounts of cells, not large visible body-wide patchworks. The reason chimerism is famous is that it collides with our cultural idea that DNA is identity. Here's a story that became widely known for that exact reason. In 2002, a woman in Washington state named Lydia Fairchild applied for public assistance. As part of the process, genetic testing was done to establish family relationships. The results said her children were related to their father, but not to her. That makes no sense if you think DNA is a single barcode. Authorities suspected fraud or surrogacy because the test results didn't match her claim of giving birth. But further investigation found evidence consistent with chimerism. Her body contained more than one genetic lineage. In other words, a DNA sample from one tissue didn't represent all of her tissues. Now, here is where we must be careful, because this is the difference between science and storytelling. Not every retelling of this case is accurate in the details. The core lesson is accurate. Chimerism can cause an apparent mismatch in standard DNA tests, depending on which tissue is sampled, because different tissues may carry different cell lineages. That's real. But you cannot responsibly claim, as a blanket statement, that she absorbed a twin sister, or that her ovaries had different DNA, unless you are quoting a verified medical report that documents those specific details, because many versions of the story add dramatic specifics that aren't confirmed in the public summaries. The scientifically solid takeaway is this: a human can, in rare cases, be a genetic mosaic at the level of whole tissues due to chimerism, and that can confuse DNA testing if the sampled tissue does not match the tissue that contributed to the child. That's enough to be mind-bending without inventing anything. Now let's bring it back to Blaschko's lines, because here's the important connection. Blaschko's lines themselves are not proof of chimerism. Most of the time, when you see Blaschko pattern skin changes, the explanation is mosaicism in skin cells or X inactivation patterns, not chimerism. But Blaschko's lines show you something profound. The body is made of territories, and territories imply borders. So the next time someone says, "My body is one thing," the more accurate statement is, your body is a coordinated society of cell populations, built from a developmental history that you do not remember, but your skin can sometimes display. And that brings us to the mistake people make when they hear about Blaschko's lines. They assume they're always there as visible stripes, and that if we just had the right kind of camera, ultraviolet, infrared, whatever, we would all look like zebras. That is not supported. It is true that different wavelengths of light can reveal different features. Ultraviolet photography can highlight differences in pigmentation and sun damage that are subtle under normal visible light. That's why dermatology and forensic imaging sometimes use UV or specialized lighting. But Blaschko's lines are not a simple UV pattern baked into everyone's skin. In most people, there is no consistent visible contrast along these lines because the neighboring skin territories behave similarly enough that nothing stands out. Blaschko's lines become visible when biology creates contrast, genetic, pigmentary, inflammatory, or structural, between those territories. Your body contains a hidden map of how skin formed. Most of the time, the map is invisible because the material looks uniform. But under the right conditions, certain genetic differences, certain skin disorders, certain patterns of gene expression, the map appears. That is the bulletproof version. Now, why does this matter beyond dermatology? Because it forces you to update your model of what a person is. You are not just a brain piloting a body. You are the emergent result of countless cell line decisions, branching histories, and developmental pathways that formed you long before memory existed. And the skin is one of the only places where that history can become visible to the naked eye. Now let's make this understandable with something more familiar. Think of a modern city. A city looks unified from above, but it's made of neighborhoods built at different times, by different plans, sometimes on top of older structures. You can walk through the city and feel continuity, but the layout contains history. Older street grids, newer highways, rebuilt zones after disasters. Your skin is like that. It looks continuous, but it has developmental neighborhoods, cell line territories, that were laid down as you grew. Blaschko's lines are the street map, and when a genetic difference or an expression difference exists between neighborhoods, the map lights up. Now, at this point, people usually ask a very human question. Why would the body be built this way? Why isn't it perfectly uniform? Because development isn't an engineer assembling a machine. It's biology growing itself. And growth has constraints. Cells divide. They move. They respond to chemical signals. They occupy space. They compete, cooperate, and differentiate. Those processes naturally create patterns. Not because the universe wants symmetry, but because when you grow complex structures under physical and biological constraints, patterns emerge. That's not mysticism. That's what happens when you build a body from cells. But here's the part that really lands if you say it clearly. Your sense of being a single, unified you is a mental model. It's a useful model. It keeps you sane. But biologically, you is not a single, uniform entity in the simplistic way your intuition imagines. Even without mosaicism or chimerism, your body is a patchwork in other ways. Different organs express different genes at different levels. Your immune system contains armies of cells with different receptor rearrangements. Your gut contains trillions of microbial partners. Your body is coordinated, not uniform. Blaschko's lines are just one dramatic reminder that unity in biology is often a managed illusion. Here's what we know. Blaschko's lines reflect developmental pathways of skin cell proliferation and migration. We know they do not align with vascular, nervous, or muscular anatomy. We know they can become visible in conditions involving mosaicism, X inactivation patterns, and certain genetic or inflammatory skin disorders. We know chimerism exists and can, in rare cases, create significant tissue-level genetic differences within one person, enough to complicate DNA testing depending on what tissue is sampled. That's a lot. Next time you look at your own skin, don't imagine stripes, imagine history. Imagine that your body was built without blueprints on paper, built by cells multiplying and migrating across a growing landscape, guided by signals, constrained by physics, and shaped by chance. In most people, it looks seamless. But sometimes the seam shows. Sometimes a boundary becomes visible, a whorl, a curve, a streak. And when that happens, it's not your body becoming alien. It's your body briefly letting you see what it always was, a living record of development, a map of how you were made. And the deeper implication is this. If a single person can contain multiple cellular lineages, if identity can depend on which tissue you sample, then the phrase, "I am my DNA," is not as simple as we pretend. You are not a barcode. You are a process. You are a system that grew itself. And your skin, about 1/16 of an inch thick on average, give or take depending on location, is the largest, most visible interface of that system with the world. The extraordinary isn't only in distant galaxies. Sometimes it's right here, hiding in plain sight, written into the biology you wear every day. So here's the question I want to leave you with. If your body can carry hidden maps of its own creation, what other maps are you living inside, right now, that you can't see? Because your senses and your brain evolved to give you a stable story, not the full data. Veil origins. Impossible truths.